Welcome. Glad that you are joining us for our video podcast. Now, if you're someone who wants the full service, who wants welcome and announcements, wants prayers, wants music, you want to go back to the YouTube page and click on the link that says full service. For those of you that are like, listen, I just kind of want the message, this is the place for you. A chance for us to learn more about how do we live our life with Jesus in the midst of all of life. And so we're glad that you are joining us. If you want to find out more information, go to our website and check it out and click on whatever links most interest you. We're so glad that you're joining us. We look forward to continuing to connect with you and engage with you. If you have questions, if you have suggestions, if you have things you'd like to ask us about, the best person to connect with is Leah. She is the one who would love to connect with you online in a way to help you grow in your faith wherever you are at. Well, thanks for joining us. Let's jump into this week's teaching. So let me ask you, are you familiar with the game Simon Says? It could be dating myself a little bit, could be going back, but it's a game I remember as a kid, and real simple. There's a leader, and they give you instructions, and you have to follow the instructions, and if you don't, you're eliminated. However, you only follow the instructions when they say Simon Says. Now, I realize that you're watching where you're watching, and I don't see you, and this could get a little bit awkward, but in person is a little bit easier. But if I said, Simon Says, touch your ears, you grab your ears. If I say Simon Says, touch your nose, you touch your nose. If I say, put your hands on your head, if you put your hands on your head, you'd be eliminated, right? I have no idea what you're doing. Listen. Don't shut me down yet. You're probably thinking, what the heck does Simon Says have to do with what we're going to talk about? Well, I hope that it creates a bit of an image for us at the very end of the message in terms of some of the application for us when it comes to understanding more and more of what does it look like to follow Jesus. If you're just jumping in for the very first time, we've been working through a series that's been focusing upon Jesus, and we've been looking at the Gospel of Mark, which is essentially the teaching and preaching of Peter, one of the close disciples of Jesus. And we've been looking at three questions that are pivotal to this series, pivotal to life, pivotal to the Bible, and it's simply this. Who is Jesus? Like, what is his identity? What is his purpose? What is he all about? And then thirdly, what is my response? How do I make it personal? In the last number of weeks, we continue to come back to this invitation that Jesus gives around follow him. Follow him. Seems so simple, yet profound. Can change your life. But what does it begin to look like? Well, at the end of this, we're going to come back to Simon Says and help us understand more and more around what does it look like? What does it look like to practically follow Jesus? So today, we're going to look at a passage in the Gospel of Mark that deals with three encounters that are pivotal to the story of Jesus, and hopefully instructive for us as well when we come to a better understanding of what does it look like to follow Jesus, to understand that yes, it begins with belief, but our belief must shape our behavior. So we're going to look at three encounters that Jesus has with Peter. And remember, this is Peter really giving a first-hand account of all that is going on. And so understand and appreciate the details. So we're going to understand it first from the context of Peter, and then help us understand around what is the application for you and for me here today. Regardless of where you are on the spectrum of faith, whether you're a follower of Jesus or you're still sort of trying to seek him and understand who he is, I believe there's a next step for all of us. So we're going to turn first to Mark chapter 8, beginning with verse 27. And this is where Peter makes this amazing declaration around who Jesus is. Let's read it and then talk about it. Mark 8, beginning with verse 27, this is what we read. It says, Jesus and his disciples left Galilee and went up to the villages near Caesarea Philippi. As they were walking along, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" Well, they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say you are one of the other prophets." Then he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter replied, "You are the Messiah." But Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. Rather interesting way to end it. When I think about it in our context, if you were to walk out on the street today and ask a bunch of random people, who do you think Jesus is? There's a good chance everybody knows who we're talking about, but there's going to be a difference or disagreement upon who he is. Some may say, well, he's a teacher or a great moral leader, or he's a faith healer, or something along those lines. Others would say, he is God, he is the Messiah. And that's kind of the conversation that Jesus has with his disciples. There's different comments around who he is, but then he gets personal. He says to them, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter declares, "You are the Messiah. You are the anointed one. You are the one that we have been waiting for, that God had promised, the one who's going to save, restore, and redeem his people in the midst of all of life." It's a rather pivotal moment in the Gospel of Mark. It's a pivotal moment for Peter, because if you go back just a couple of chapters, you realize that the disciples were looking around at different times thinking like, who is this guy? And so if you're someone who's still seeking Jesus, I hope this is encouraging to you, that as you lean in more, as you seek him more, there'll become greater clarity. Now, for some of you watching, you'll be like, yeah, I'm with Peter right here. I know that Jesus is the Messiah. Well, that last comment that Jesus makes, when he tells them not to warn anyone, is a bit of an indicator as to something more is about to happen. Because wouldn't you think, if Peter declared that Jesus was the Messiah, that this would make perfect sense, that why wouldn't you start telling everyone, like, we found the Messiah, this is the one that the prophets had been speaking about? But Jesus tells them to keep it quiet. Why? Because they're about to see, they didn't fully appreciate or understand what it meant for Jesus to be the Messiah. And maybe you can appreciate this. Maybe you can believe in Jesus, you can understand Jesus, you can know that he is the one who died and he rose again, but what does it begin to mean for you? Because you keep going through the Gospel of Mark, the very next place we land is Jesus begins to teach. He starts speaking to his disciples about how he must suffer, how he's going to go to Jerusalem, he's going to be handed over, he's going to be crucified, he's going to die, but on the third day he's going to rise again. Well, this to me would have been one of those jaw-dropping moments for the disciples. They'd be like, listen, wait a second, Jesus, we just acknowledge that you're the Messiah, that you're the one that God had sent to save us and redeem us, and now you're talking about dying? Well, Peter, as Peter often does, steps up, and we're told he takes Jesus aside and begins to rebuke him. Basically, like, gets up in his face and is like, Jesus, no, this is not the deal. And then Jesus says some pretty harsh words. He actually jumps in and says to Peter, "Get away from me, Satan. You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's." And you may stop there and be like, whoa, wait a second. Is that actually what Jesus said? Like, that's pretty harsh. Like, Peter just declared Jesus as the Messiah, and now he's calling him Satan. Understand the context. Understand that everybody else would have been on Peter's side of looking at Jesus like, why are you talking about suffering? Why are you talking about dying? You see, for them, for the entire nation of Israel, their understanding of a Messiah was like a conquering king, not a king who would lay down his life. You see, Jesus was countercultural. He came into this world as the Messiah based on what it was we needed. Have you ever stopped and considered why the cross is pivotal to Christianity? Because it speaks to the reality that Jesus came to give of his life for the benefit of others. You know, when you think of political powers, when you think of kings, when you think of rulers of this world, they often expect others to lay down their lives for their benefit. But Jesus does the exact opposite. He was the suffering king. He was the suffering servant. He's the one who went to the cross for our benefit. You see, it's one thing to say that Jesus is the Messiah, but do we understand what that means? The impact that it has, the full extent of God's love for us. Well, there's more. As you continue to read, there's yet another encounter. We're told that 6 days later, Jesus, Peter, James, and John, they all go up on the mountainside, and something happens. Let's read it, and then we'll talk about it. We're turning to Mark chapter 9, beginning with verse 2. And this is what we read. It says, 6 days later, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, and led them up a high mountain to be alone. As the men watched, Jesus' appearance was transformed, and his clothes became dazzling white. far whiter than any earthly bleach could ever make them. Then Elijah and Moses appeared and began talking with Jesus. Peter exclaimed, "Rabbi, it's wonderful for us to be here. Let's make 3 shelters as memorials, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." He said this because he didn't really know what else to say, for they were all terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my dearly loved son. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, Moses and Elijah were gone, and they saw only Jesus with them. Okay, so what was that all about? A couple of key things. Jesus goes up with Peter, James, and John on the mountain, and suddenly Jesus' appearance changes. He begins to see the glory of God. It would have been a similar parallel if you know the story of Moses going up to Mount Sinai to gather the 10 commandments. That when he came down, the people who saw him noticed that his appearance had changed. Very similar. But in addition to that, Peter is looking around and now he sees Jesus, Elijah, and Moses. Now they were the heavyweights of the Old Testament. Moses represents like the law of God, the 10 commandments. Elijah represents the prophets of God, the ones who spoke of the coming Messiah. And then there's this big moment and Peter misses it again. We're told that they're terrified. Have you ever been in a place where there's like awkward silence and you don't know what to say? Bit of life advice. When you don't know what to say, the best thing is to say nothing. But Peter, as we see so often, just simply can't help himself. He's like, "Hey, I got an idea. We got Moses, we got Elijah, we got you, Jesus. We're going to build 3 shelters and we're going to glorify you and this is going to be awesome." And then suddenly, as Peter is speaking, a cloud envelops them and the voice of God says, "This is my son. Listen to him." And suddenly Elijah's gone and Moses is gone. All right, like what the heck just happened? Why is Peter in trouble yet again? Real important. Peter was trying to put Jesus on an equal footing with Moses and Elijah. And what was being made very clear is that Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God, he is unique. He is the exclusive way to God. That he is not equal to Moses and Elijah. Moses and Elijah point and speak to him. You see, this is interesting when you think of Jesus as compared to other faiths and other beliefs. They all speak about pointing you to God, whereas Jesus never talks like that. He speaks of how he is the way, he is the truth, he is the life. He continually points to himself. Why? Because Jesus is not a prophet. He's not a teacher. He's not simply a faith healer. He is God in human form. I mean, think about that for a moment. Like when we start to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, we begin to understand and appreciate the fact that Jesus is God truly with us. And so we worship him. We don't worship Moses. We don't worship Elijah. We use their teachings to help us see and worship Jesus, the true Messiah. Okay, that was a lot. So what does this all mean? Peter declares Jesus the Messiah. Then he gets rebuked by Jesus for trying to tell Jesus not to suffer. And then he tries to put Jesus on equal footing with others. And again, he gets shut down. What does it mean? Back to the 3 questions. It reminds us again of the significance of recognizing the identity of Jesus is God, that he is the Messiah. It helps us understand again, the purpose is that in Jesus, he is the one who gives. He is the one who suffers. He is the only one who can truly draw us to the Father. But then we land at the 3rd place. What is our response? Up until this point, you can believe everything I said. You can believe Jesus the Messiah. You can believe that he died for you. You can believe that he is the only way to God. But have you made it personal? How does it begin to shape your behavior? I want to pull back to 2 phrases that are used in these encounters. The first one comes in Jesus' rebuke of Peter. That after he rebukes Peter, he begins to speak to the entire crowd. And in Mark 8, verse 34, he says this: "If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. Take up your cross and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give your life for my sake, for the sake of the good news, you will save it. For what benefit if you gain the whole world, but lose your own soul? What does it mean to follow Jesus? One phrase. It means you give up your way. When you follow someone, you understand that they are the one leading you. They are the one guiding you. Do we allow Jesus to do that in our life? Do we truly allow him to lead? Maybe sometimes we go to him for advice and suggestions and, kind of help us on some of the issues of life. But do we truly allow him to lead us in the midst of all of life? You see, understand, Jesus is not just some self-help guru. Like our culture has idolized and fallen in love with self-help. How do I become the best version of myself? That's not what Jesus is asking of us. He's like, will you lay down your life? Will you literally pick up a cross? Will you follow me in all of life? It begins to set your purpose apart. This past week, I spent a couple of days skiing with my youngest son, Canaan. And we had great conversations on chairlifts and going up and down. And one of the questions we had was around, what is our purpose in life? Like, as a follower of Jesus, do we just kind of do what we want to do? And we got talking about how no. We use our lives as a means to follow Jesus. That everything we do, the big things, the small things, the things that people may never see, we do it in a way to step closer to Jesus. We lay down our life to follow him. Then there's a second phrase. Very next encounter. When Jesus is up on the mountain, and as Peter is saying something, he doesn't really know what he's saying. The voice from God says this. This is my son. Listen to him. Simon says, it's a game that reminds us of the importance of listening. That if we're not listening, if we're not paying attention, we're not going to follow the instructions. Same thing is true with Jesus. That so often we may think, well, what does it look like to follow Jesus? Well, the question I'd come back to is, are we listening to him? Are we looking to the Bible? Are we spending time in prayer? Are we landing at a place where we truly allow God to speak into our life? You see, it's one thing to know that Jesus is the Messiah. It's one thing to understand that he lived, he died, he rose again for our sake. But are we following him? Are we giving up our way? Are we choosing to listen to him? This is a really cool thing about Christianity, is that those are the principles, and the application begins to be played out differently in our lives. I don't know where you are, I don't know what you're doing right now, but what would it begin to look like if this week you truly sought to listen to what Jesus wanted you to do? It may come in a nudge. It may come in an opportunity. It may come in a place where maybe you won't say what you thought you wanted to say. You see, Kanan asked me this week about what difference does Jesus make in my life? And we talked about different things. But one of the things I realized is that oftentimes it means that I step away from my selfish behaviors of doing the things that will only benefit my life and look to how I can benefit others through serving them. And in doing so, truly following Jesus. This week, as you think of following Jesus, what would it look like to lay down your desires to honor Jesus? What does it look like to truly listen to him, maybe in the quietness of life, to see what he is asking of you? Let me pray. And I'm just going to pray that there be clarity for all of us, for opportunities this week to truly take a step that we believe we're stepping into because this is the way of Jesus. Let me pray. And so, Lord God, as we think of Jesus and we think of who you are, we think of all that you've done for us, may our lives be a response. May we truly lay down our lives for you. May we truly listen to you. That may be just stepping away from some of the busyness. May just be taking time to read the Bible and see what are you asking of us. It may be responding to some of the nudges that come in the midst of life. May we take a step. May we be deliberate and intentional in following you. For we ask it, Jesus, in your name. Amen. And so, hey, I really hope this week that this becomes intentional and lived out. And I'm going to ask a favor. I'm going to ask if there's something that maybe comes up in your life and you're like, man, I would have never have done this if not for Jesus. I would love to hear from you. I got an email from a buddy this week just talking about some of the little things in his life that were prompted because of his following Jesus. I mean, he's a manager and he decided to serve his entire staff lunch. And they're all looking at him like, why do you do this? No other manager does this. And he said in the quietness of his heart, he's like, because this is what it means to follow Jesus. I would love to hear more stories like that. Cheering you on this week as we take steps closer and closer to following Jesus.